Even when the conquistadors had Montezuma in confinement, the human sacrifices and cannibalism continued. Castillo describes the Aztec or Mexican population. So desperately did they assail us under the most horrible sound of drums, pipes, and trumpets, accompanied by the most obscene and abusive language. The whole of us, they cried out, were to be sacrificed to their gods. Our hearts were to be torn from our bodies. The blood was to be drawn from our veins, and our arms and legs were to be eaten up at their festivals. The remaining parts of our bodies would be thrown to the tigers, lions, and serpents, which they kept in cages. These had not been fed for these 2 days, in order that they might devour our flesh the more greedily. Our gold and other things would be their booty. And they told the Tlascalans they should be locked up in cages where they fattened people for their sacrifices." End quote. Castillo next describes the grisly aftermath of what happened to his fellow soldiers and friends when they fell into the hands of Montezuma and his warriors. This was at The blood of our unfortunate countrymen was even then sticking to the walls of the temple in this township. Here were likewise found on an altar the entire skins of the faces of 2 Spaniards, with the beards still hanging to them. The skins had been dressed in the same way as the leather we use for making gloves. In the same manner they had prepared the skins of 4 horses. Great care had been taken of the hair and horseshoes, which were suspended in the chief temple as tokens of victory. Further were discovered numerous articles of Spanish dress which had been brought as an offering to the idols. On one of the walls of a house were found written in charcoal the following words: "Here the unfortunate one UST with several of his comrades was imprisoned by the enemy." This one used was a cavalier who had served under Narvaez and was one of the most distinguished personages among his troops. End quote. A large group of natives joined the Spaniards in rebellion against Montezuma's rule. That wasn't the only reason though. Quoting Castillo, "We were joined by upwards of 20,000 of our allies, who had assembled from Calcotescaco, Huexocinco, Tlaxcala, and other townships. This was a larger body of Indians than had ever, up to this time, joined our troops in New Spain. All these warriors had been induced to join us in the hopes of making a rich booty. But the expectation of plentiful repasts of human flesh, which never failed after an engagement, was no less an incitement. And I cannot better compare these many thousands of Indians than to the large flocks of vultures, ravens, and other birds of prey, which, in the Italian wars, follow the armies, to satiate themselves on the dead bodies which have fallen in battle." End quote. Castillo next describes what he and his fellow soldiers were forced to observe. "After we had, at last, with excessive toil, crossed a deep opening, and had arrived at our encampment, where we were pretty secure from the enemy's attacks, Sandoval, Lugo, Tapia, and Alvarado stood together relating what had befallen each of the respective divisions, when all in a moment the large drum of Huitzilopochtli again resounded from the summit of the temple, accompanied by all the hellish music of shell trumpets, horns, and other instruments. The sound was truly dismal and terrifying. But still more agonizing was all this to us when we looked up and beheld how the Mexicans were mercilessly sacrificing to their idols our unfortunate companions, who had been captured in Cortes' flight across the opening. We could plainly see the platform, with the chapel in which those cursed idols stood, how the Mexicans had adorned the heads of the Spaniards with feathers and compelled their victims to dance round the god Huitzilopochtli. We saw how they stretched them out at full length on a large stone, ripped open their breasts with flint knives, tore out the palpitating heart, and offered it to their idols. Alas! We were forced to be spectators of all this, and how they then seized hold of the dead bodies by the legs, and threw them headlong down the steps of the temple, at the bottom of which other executioners stood, ready to receive them, who severed the arms, legs, and heads from the bodies, drew the skin off the faces, which were tanned with the beards still adhering to them, and produced as spectacles of mockery and derision at their feasts, the legs, arms, and other parts of the body being cut up and devoured. In this way the Mexicans served all the Spaniards they took prisoners, and the entrails alone were thrown to the tigers, lions, otters, and serpents, which were kept in cages. These abominable barbarities we were forced to witness with our own eyes from our very camp, and the reader may easily imagine our feelings, How excessively agonizing! The more so, as we were so near our unfortunate companions, without being able to assist them. Every one of us thanked God from the bottom of his soul for his great mercy in having rescued us from such a horrible death. While we were thus gazing upon this dismal scene, fresh troops of Mexicans came storming along in great numbers, and fell upon us from all sides with the fury of wild beasts, and continually cried, "Only look up to the temple. Such will be the end of you all." This our gods have often promised us, but the threats which they threw out against our Tlascalan friends were even more terrible. They threw among them the bones of the legs and arms of their countrymen, and of ours, which had been roasted, and the flesh torn off, crying out at the same time, "We have already satiated ourselves with the flesh of your countrymen, and of the toils. You may, therefore, as well enjoy what remains on these bones. Do you see the ruins of those houses there which you have pulled down? You will soon have to build us up much larger and finer ones. Only remain faithful to the toils, and we promise you, you shall be with them when we sacrifice them to our gods." Cuauhtémoc, after gaining this victory, forwarded the feet and hands of our unfortunate countrymen, with their beards and skins, as also the heads of the horses they had killed, to all our allies and his own relations, accompanied by the assurance that more than half of the Spaniards had been killed, and that he would soon have the rest in his power. He therefore ordered those towns which had entered into our alliance immediately to send ambassadors to Mexico. Otherwise he would march against them and put the whole of the inhabitants to death. The Mexicans made solemn sacrifices every day in the large temple on the Tlatelolco, and celebrated their feasts. Large fires were kept up on the platform of the temple during the whole night, and each night a certain number of our unfortunate countrymen were sacrificed to their cursed idols, Huitzilopochtli and Tezcatlipoca, who, in the discourses which the papas held with them, promised that we should all be killed in a few days. End quote. Later on, during the conquest, Castillo describes a battle with a post-Montezuma group of warriors. Quote, "One morning large bodies of Mexicans again fell upon us with the intention of surrounding us on all sides. Each separate body of the Mexicans was distinguished by a particular dress and certain warlike devices, and regularly relieved each other in battle. In the midst of their fierce attacks they constantly cried out, 'You are a set of low-minded scoundrels, you are fit for nothing, and you neither know how to build a house, nor how to cultivate maize. You are a pack of worthless fellows, and only come to plunder our town. You have fled away from your own country, and deserted your own king. But before 8 days are past, there will not be one of you left alive. You miserable beings, you are so bad and beastly that even your very flesh is not eatable. It tastes as bitter as gall.' Against the Tlascalans they threw out more terrible language, threatening to turn them all into slaves, fatten some for their sacrifices, and reserve others for rebuilding their houses and tilling the ground." End quote. In the next quote, Castillo describes what he and others were forced to witness. Again and again, throughout the conquest of Montezuma's kingdom, the hellish rejoicings on the summit of the large temple were still kept up during the night. Really, it is impossible to describe the dreadful and dismal sound of this diabolical drum, with the yelling and other dissonant noises which burst forth each time the Mexicans sacrificed one of our countrymen between the large fires they had kindled on the summit of the temple. For 10 successive days were these inhuman sacrifices continued, until all their prisoners were gone. Cristobal de Guzman, who was among the number, they had reserved for the last, and kept alive for 18 days. End quote. During the process of the downfall and conquest of Mexico, many tribes came to the conquistadors, seeking protection from their enemies. Their enemies, they said, raided them, took them as slaves, violated their women, and sacrificed and ate them. The conquistadors quickly found out that the tribes seeking refuge did the exact same thing to the people. They claimed to be seeking refuge from. While fighting a battle in a major Mexican city, there were temples where the remains of sacrificed and eaten Spaniards were put on display. Castillo describes it in his own words. "Suspended from beams, the heads of several of my companions in arms, who had been slain in the different engagements. The hair of these heads and beards was much longer than when on the living body, and I certainly should not have believed this if I had not seen it with my own eyes 3 days after. when our division had likewise advanced up to this spot. Among these heads, I recognized those of 3 of my companions in arms. At this melancholy sight, the tears rolled from our eyes, and we allowed these sorrowful remains of our fellow countrymen to hang there for the present, until 12 days after, when we took them down with others we found elsewhere in these temples, and buried them in a church we founded, which is now called the Church of the Martyrs." End quote. Later on in the conquest, in or around Chiapa, the conquistadors came across more people in wooden cages. Quote, "We instantly liberated the whole of these prisoners, and sent them to their respective homes. We also found in the temples diabolical-looking idols, all of which Father Juan ordered to be burnt on the spot, with the remains of several old and young Indians who had been sacrificed in these buildings. In the temples we also discovered traces of other abominations of a most horrible nature." End quote. According to the computations of the Franciscan monks, 2,500 people were sacrificed and eaten annually in the Mexican Empire and surrounding territories. Castillo says this number was only for the Mexican provinces, and that the total number for the region is much greater. All of these abominable customs were being practiced across a territory that was 3 times bigger than old Spain back in Europe. That concludes the video. Thanks for watching.